Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our today's webinar. Before we start, I would like to introduce you to our webinar tool Zoom, which is pretty new to us, so there might be some mistakes during this webinar, so please, I would like to apologize before everything happened, which means during this webinar, you are in listen-only modus, and if you would like to get in contact with us, please use the chat functionality you can find above your screen. If you go with the mouse above it, it will scroll down and you've got the possibility to have a question and answer, to chat with us, or to comment on anything we do. During this webinar, please use it if you can't see our screen, can't hear us, or anything like this. If you've got technical questions or from the content or belonging to the content, please use this chat functionality, and after each part of my colleagues, they will answer your questions, and at the end there might be another Q&A session if you would like to have such one. So a couple of seconds ago you hear me talking German. I'm sorry, because we're not used to this tool. We try to keep up in English. Now I may introduce our speakers, or today's speakers with us, because we're here on our webinar Oracle Forms 12c, the most popular features. You already know quite a lot of Oracle Forms 12c, but you didn't know the latest features, and I'm pretty happy to present or to introduce to you our today's speakers, which is Michael Ferrante. He's a product manager for Oracle Forms. And Michael, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
It is my pleasure. Michael will tell you all about the latest and greatest features of Oracle 12c, and you will definitely love Oracle 12c after you hear Michael. And my colleague Ronald, who is our support manager from PITS, some of you might know him, will round up these popular features by showing you some PITSCon issues with it or how to handle them. So Ronald, I'm happy to have you with me, even in the same room, so that you can give me any sign if there will be any difficulties. And my name is Doreen. I'm the customer service manager at PITS. Some of you know me from my emails or my calls, and I'm your moderator during this webinar, and I try to fix everything else. So concerning our Q&A session, I would like to have a few words on this. You already sent some questions via Twitter or mail, and I'm pretty sure after our presentation there will be furthermore, and we will try to answer them all. If we can't answer them all on this webinar, we will send you an email and let you know exactly how you can work with Oracle 12c and the latest features. And Michael, when I heard the first time that you will be with us today, I was searching about our common history, so to say, how we get to know each other. And the first thing I had in mind was we met each other at the DOAG, which is the German Oracle User Group. And we've met there several years after years after years. And I just wanted to let our audience know how we look like, and that we really enjoy to have you here on our DOAG. So thank you so much, and I hope I see you this year also there.
Super.
Great. So please give me a couple of seconds before Michael will start, that I have the chance to introduce our company to you. So the most popular features about 12c will be taking place in a couple of seconds, but the most popular features about PITS is that we are pretty close by, which means I've got lovely colleagues in America, PITS America LLC in Troy, Michigan. We've got a company in the UK, in Twickenham, which is near London. We've got some colleagues in the north of Germany and our headquarters in Stuttgart, where Ronald and I are sitting and working for. So whenever you need us, we are pretty close to you. The same with Oracle, of course. And what is actually very popular about us is that we've got a lot of experience. We've got an expert strategy, which means there is a rely on our years of industry expertise, and we can help to plan or make a great plan for your modernization, which means going digital. And with your Oracle technologies, who develop year after year after year, you've got the possibility to be up to date whenever you need it, because you take a great invest when you bought Oracle technology, and we will be your first support for your Oracle technology. We've got a full stack team, which means we've got a huge expertise with Oracle technologies from Forms version 2.0 or 2.3, from 4, 6, 9 up to the latest version. And of course, other Oracle technologies like ADF, Apex, BI Publisher, reports, and other stuff like this. So if you've got any questions concerning Oracle technology, please feel free to contact us. During digitalization, there is, of course, the huge migration part why we are here together today, because you can easily upgrade your legacy Oracle forms and reports with PitsCon software, and of course to be always under support and never under construction, which means please update to Forms 12c, because it's a great new version which got a lot of new fabulous features, which Mike will tell you in a couple of seconds and show you, of course. So please let me take a last look on our philosophy, which means we listen to each customer's unique service and technology need. So whatever you got, like I've got my reports, I need an analysis or anything like that, you can contact us. And we guide the customers through structural digital transformation. From your first thought, I have to do something like digital, to a really digitalization. And of course, this was Oracle and Oracle technology. And we help customers realize business value at each step of the modernization roadmap. You made a great invest when you choose Oracle technology for your business at the best value, and we would like to keep it alive. No matter how old it is, how much invest you made, about 20 years or longer, because Oracle technology is still the best on the market. And to prove that this is right, I've got a couple of our customers I'm so proud to present you today, which is Volkswagen. You may know it from Germany. It's Men's Warehouse. There's an assurance which is called Sparkassenversicherung Informatik. Sounds a bit weird when I talk German. And of course, one of our huge customers, it's RR. So thank you so much for being our customer and buying Oracle technology, and stay with Oracle. Thank you very much for that. So I hope you're ready, because I would like to hand over to Michael Ferrante. And Michael, I think I just have to stop my presentation, and then it will be up to you.
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the next minutes.
All righty.
Yes.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, great. So let me get started. As Doran mentioned, my name's Mike Ferrante. I am the product manager for Forms, as well as some other products, but Forms primarily. And I thought we would take the time today to not necessarily cover all the features of version 12, but some of the features that have been highly discussed since we released the product back in 2015. And I think hopefully by the time we get to the end, questions that you had or have will have been answered. And if not, hopefully you'll take the time to get in touch with us and give us an opportunity to get answers to those questions. I certainly don't want anyone to go away with unanswered questions. So as always, at least from the Oracle side, we do offer this statement that suggests that in the event we should happen to talk about future events, features, or anything else of that nature, future crystal ball information, please understand that it is subject to change, and we certainly don't want you to go to your account manager and say, hey, Mike told me that this was going to happen, and for some reason it didn't. Understand that it is subject to change. So the agenda is quite full. I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly. Again, so if there's questions, let me know. But what I want to do is take a quick look at some of the features as they were released over time, just so that you could get an idea of what the benefits of upgrading are, assuming you're on an older version. I want to talk about Java WebStart and how it's used in Forms 12 and what advantages that's going to deliver to you. Then we're going to talk about a new feature that allows your administrators to send messages out to Forms applications that are running. This can be pretty powerful. And then I'm going to soften it down a little bit and kind of take some time to talk about how imagery in your application can be used to kind of brighten up those aging looking applications. They don't necessarily need to be running on the latest and greatest version, although the latest version does offer some new features with imagery that may be of interest to you. So we're going to talk about some of that. And then I thought I would assemble just a small list of I'm going to call them tips, but ways in which you could adapt and adjust your application without actually making changes to your application. And we'll explain that in more detail shortly. We'll talk about what's coming in the future, and then of course share some community information, and then we'll do a little question and answer. So as I said, there's a lot here, but I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly and hopefully not too quickly as to confuse anybody. So back in 2015, we released version 12 of Forms. Some of you may have seen this slide before because it is the same slide I've used for quite some time now, because I think it kind of covers the broad array of features that we've delivered. On this slide, you could see roughly 6 or 7 or so new features that were delivered, but I'll tell you that in total, since the release in 2015 and coming forward to the latest release, which is 12.2.1.2, the number of new features has gone well over 50 or so. So it would be nearly impossible for me to list all the new features here without spending at least the whole day talking about it. So as I mentioned, I wanted to kind of highlight some of the features that have been delivered, at least as far back as version 10, because all the features are cumulative coming forward. It means that if you grab the latest version, you'll consume all of these new features, as well as many more that, of course, I can't list here because there's not enough space on the slides. I won't go through these individually, but I just wanted you to get an idea that with each release, we have introduced many new features. Some are specific to the infrastructure of the installation. Some are associated with administration, some are associated to your design time experience, and some are associated with the runtime experience. So we've definitely touched on all areas of the product, and hopefully somewhere in here, you'll find ways to improve on your own application and make your development and runtime experience better than it was when using those older versions. Excuse me. For more information on all of the versions, at least most of the previous versions, if you go out onto the Forms website on OTN, Oracle Technology Network, we've tried to consolidate as much of the documentation, both current and past. So if you're looking for old documentation, it's there, and certainly all the new documentation is accessible from that same place as well. And that's what that URL is at the bottom. So I mentioned we're going to talk about Java WebStart. I understand that many of you may not be familiar with Java WebStart, which was the case for me as well before we went on this venture of trying to determine what do we do in the event that the browser vendors decide they don't want to support the Java plugin anymore. However, now with some experience under our belts, we have a pretty good understanding of what we could do with Java WebStart, and we're starting to realize that Java WebStart may be much more powerful than we once believed. So I think this move to Java WebStart, or at least option to move to Java WebStart, could potentially make your application far better than it ever was before. So let's try to take a look at this and see if we could kind of clarify, at least at a high level, what Java WebStart is going to do for you. So in short, and this is not in the context of Forms, but just purely consider a Java application running in Java WebStart. It doesn't necessarily have to be Forms. It could be Hello World. It could be a clock. It could be whatever, right? So Java WebStart allows you to run an application without having to install the application locally. So imagine any application that you install on a user's desktop. In the case of Java WebStart, the application is delivered from a central server, right, a web application server, but runs on the client machine, but behaves much like a natively installed application. right? So it's not like a web application. It's not like an HTML application that's contained to the browser, and all it does is show you page after page, but has no idea of the underlying operating system that your end user is using or what's installed on it. With Java WebStart, again, you're going to run the application in a way in which it behaves very much like a native application. So that's pretty powerful. The application can be launched from a browser, a hyperlink in a web page, from the command line on the end user machine, a custom script, a shortcut, pretty much any way you could imagine you could start a Java WebStart application. Now again, remember, I'm not talking about forms necessarily, even though this does apply to forms. This is kind of just generic Java WebStart information. Java WebStart is supported by nearly any browser on any platform that supports Java. So that actually is much more powerful than what we had before, where in the old school with the Java plugin, you were limited to platforms that supported the Java plugin, and recently that's been reduced quite a bit. The fact that Java WebStart spans at least several more platforms than the Java plugin did, you now have the ability to run Java WebStart applications, including forms, on platforms that you potentially were not able to run them on before. The application itself running in Java WebStart looks and feels the same, so there's no change to your application. It does exactly what it did before, so you don't have to worry about that. The only difference is instead of having your application jailed into a web browser window, it now becomes free-floating on the user desktop. But the application itself will do exactly what it did before in exactly the same way that it did it before. So that's pretty important. And another important aspect is the fact that once the application has started, assuming you've started it from a browser, it's no longer related to the browser. It's not a child to the browser, which means if you want to use that browser to search on Google or go to yahoo.com or oracle.com or pits.com, you could do that without interrupting the application. If you decide you no longer want that browser open, you could close it, and it will not affect the application that's running in Java WebStart because there's no relationship between those two processes. In the old days, and I keep saying that, the old days, in the applet days where the applet was running in the browser, if you close the browser, you also close the application. And that's quite unfortunate because in many cases, a user may want to run the application, but at the same time, potentially do a Google search, maybe look up some other information. And oftentimes that creates a little bit of a problem because if they're not careful, they accidentally will close their application, their forms application. So Java WebStart gives some pretty good advantages over Java applets. On the bottom of the screen, I do have some URLs that refer to some of the Oracle documentation or Java documentation that explains in a little bit more depth what Java WebStart is and how you could use it. A simple Google search will get you there if you're not able to copy this information down or don't have access to the slides later. But I did want to share it just to show you that there is documentation out there that does provide some pretty good information about what Java WebStart is. And one last point, at least before we go forward, is that it's important to understand that Java WebStart, for those of you that are not familiar with it, has really nothing directly to do with forms. It's not a forms technology. It's part of the Java technology stack. So there's a lot of customization you could do in that space, again, unrelated to your forms application. So keep that in mind as you start using it. There's some really powerful things you could do with Java WebStart to make your forms application running in that space be a little bit more 21st century. So let's look at Java WebStart in the context of forms. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the requirements and potentially limitations that result from using Java WebStart. Because there are, unfortunately, at least a couple limitations, but I don't think significant ones. So if you decide you want to use single sign-on with your Oracle Forms application, you could still do that with Java WebStart. However, obviously, because single sign-on is a function that requires a browser, you would have to use the browser to call your Forms application. If you remember just a couple slides ago, I said that you could call your Forms application with Java WebStart from the command line or a custom script, etc. But that's only in the case where you're not using single sign-on. In any case where you want to use single sign-on, you have to have a browser because that's just how single sign-on works. It takes advantage of functionality that the browser offers. Single sign-on authentication may not propagate through the web show document call. I don't know how many of you on the call are Forms developers, but basically what that means is, although you're authenticating through single sign-on, It's not really single sign-on because, again, there is no relationship to a browser after the single sign-on occurs. So let's say, for example, from your Forms application, you try to open an ADF application or Oracle Reports, it doesn't really matter. And Oracle Reports is single sign-on protected. The fact that you single signed on into your Forms application, unfortunately, will not carry over to the calling of reports. You'll have to authenticate again before you could gain access to the report. But again, that's not necessarily something that Forms is doing. That's just a result of the fact that there's no browser associated with the running Forms application. In version 12, we introduced a new feature that allows you to perform the single sign out functionality. In other words, exit your single sign-on session. In the case of Java WebStart, because there's no browser, again, there's nothing really to single sign out from. So that feature that we added in version 12 only applies when you're running the form the traditional way within the browser. Okay. Currently, starting from the base release of version 12 through the current version 12.2.1.2, we do not support JavaScript integration. Again, not necessarily a limitation, just simply the result of not having a browser. Since JavaScript is akin to HTML, which requires a browser, if there's no browser, I can't have JavaScript. We are investigating some possible alternatives to this lack of JavaScript integration, which we previously provided. I am hopeful that we could deliver on what's being investigated. If we are successful, we are hopeful that in a coming version, we'll be able to introduce the ability to do something similar to the JavaScript integration that you had previously. So that's kind of why the version numbers are there. So we're working on that one. And as for your client, previously you had to have a very specific browser and a very specific Java plugin. With Java WebStart, you could relax a little bit. You now have the option of using just about any browser that you want. And you have the option of either choosing the Java plugin installation or the Java development kit, the JDK. You do not have to have both. You do not have to have any one, one or the other. You could pick one or the other. So you have a little bit more of a choice to make here. Currently, if you try to run a Forms application as a Java applet, and that, again, the traditional style, you would not be able to use Microsoft Edge. You would not be able to use Google Chrome. And if you're using a current version of Firefox, you would not be able to use Firefox. However, with Java WebStart, as you can see, you could use any of these browsers if you chose to launch your application through a browser. So this is kind of nice. And in the middle, you can see we do support Safari as well, which will obviously be on your Apple or Mac platform. Okay. So we're going to refer to Java WebStart and the Forms Standalone Launcher, which we're not going to talk about the Forms Standalone Launcher here, but we're going to refer to those as the browserless solutions. With those browserless solutions, we introduced a few new applet settings to give you a little bit more control over how that standalone window behaves. The first one we introduced is called Always on Top. For those of you familiar with the Windows platform, that Always on Top option forces the current window you're looking at to be exactly that, always on top of others. This can often be helpful when you have an application on a machine where you don't necessarily want the user tinkering around with other things that potentially are behind it. Very similar to, say, kiosk mode, for those of you familiar with that. So this is a pretty helpful one in those cases. Center on Startup gives a nice professional look. By default, applications that do not fill the entire display start in the 0, position, or the top left-hand corner of your display. The Center on Startup option forces the startup window to be sent to as closely as possible to the center of the screen. This tends to give a nice professional kind of look to your application instead of starting somewhat orphaned looking in the top left corner. And the last one we delivered that's unique to this browserless environment is resizable. We have a lot of customers that have said, my application is set up pixel perfect. I do not want the users to be able to change the size of the window. It is what it is. They shouldn't be allowed to change it. How can I do that? Well, with Java WebStart and the standalone launcher, you can now do that. By setting is resizable to false, the user will not be able to resize the window. It will be set up exactly as the administrator has configured it, or the developer. If you programmatically want to change the size of the window, you could still do that even though this is set. It just prevents the user from being able to make an adjustment to the window size. So those are kind of helpful in that aspect. Under the hood, Java WebStart leverages the Java Network Launch Protocol. I'm not going to spend too much time going into the technical details here, but I did want to illustrate how some of the power of this works compared to, say, the old traditional applet style. If you were to do a view source on the client side of what's being sent from the server to the end user machine, what you'll find is something that looks like this when you run your Forms application. The top part is the key information that's used by Java WebStart to kind of set up the environment and prepare for starting the application. There's plenty of documentation that covers some of the customizations you could do to this. This is customizable to some degree. And again, at the bottom, I have the information, but again, a quick Google search, you'll find all the cool things that you could do with this. The bottom section that's sent to the client machine, you should be familiar with if you have seen this before on the older versions. It's just the application parameters that are unique to your application. So whether it's setting up the company logo or the background, the height and width of the application window. Again, I mentioned that center on startup option. If you wanted to pass in, I don't know, username and password, whatever Forms applet parameters we had previously, those would all be displayed here in the bottom section in a very familiar way. So hopefully you'll be able to be familiar with this enough to where you could customize it in such a way that your application could take advantage of some of the new functionality that Java WebStart delivers. So let's actually put this into practice. So we want to use Java WebStart, but we're not really sure how we want to launch it. So I mentioned that you could start your application from a web browser or hyperlink, and you could do that with either the HTTP or JNLP protocols. In the first two little browser snapshots there, you can see that I show how you would potentially do it with HTTP or HTTPS. Out of the box, we deliver an example configuration called WebStart. You certainly could customize that in any way you want, but either of those would start the Java WebStart application containing your form. On the bottom, you'll see two new protocols that you probably haven't seen before. These were added as a result of a change made in Java starting in 8 Update 92. This is actually considered a custom protocol or custom leveraged by a custom protocol handler. So in other words, your machine really knows nothing about this until Java 8 Update 92 or newer is installed. Once it's installed, if the browser is following the standards, it will take advantage of the fact that you've registered this protocol in the machine. And I don't mean you have personally registered it, but the installation of Java has registered it, and thereby sending the request directly to the Java WebStart engine and bypassing the use of the browser. And I'm going to explain how that works in a little bit more detail shortly, because it's actually kind of a cool feature. The other way to call the application, as I mentioned, potentially could be from a command line, a script, a shortcut, custom executable, or builder. So here you can see some examples of starting up a Windows DOS shell and how you might potentially call your Forms application using WebStart. Java WS is a Java executable found in the Java home bin directory, just like the Java executable is. Both the browser, the call from the browser and the command line would result in exactly the same application once it's started up. If you want to use WebStart from the builder, simply go into the builder preferences on the runtime tab and append to the end of the application server URL whatever configuration you want to use that's set up to use WebStart. And when you press the Run Form button from within the builder, it will launch your application using Java WebStart. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Okay. So I mentioned I want to show how this actually works kind of as a flow. So let's assume you want to use HTTP or HTTPS. Here's roughly what happens. Again, kind of at a high, maybe intermediate level. The first thing you're going to do is enter the URL in a browser. That request will be made by the browser to the server, the middle tier server where Forms lives. The Forms server will then return with a JNLP file which historically would have been an HTML file, but in this case, because it's Java WebStart request, it will return a JNLP file. You'll get a dialog box, assuming you're using Firefox, a dialog box that looks something like this, where you'll have an option to either save that file or open it, or run it, I guess is a better way of describing it. If you choose to run it, you first have to tell Firefox, well, okay, so I have this file that I don't recognize. What do you want to run it with? What do you want to open it with? So you'll click on Browse. You'll get a dialog box that looks something like this. Hopefully the machine has been properly set up by the Java installation, and it will know that likely what you want to do is use the Java WebStart launcher. You'll select that. You'll be returned back to this window, which now you'll see Java WebStart is pre-filled in there. You'll click on OK. And if you notice on the bottom, it says, do this automatically for files like this from now on. If you check that box at the bottom, you won't be prompted in the same way each time you run it. It will just automatically run. So that's kind of convenient. When you click on OK, Java WebStart will start. Based on the information it was passed to it, it will call the form server, get whatever information it needs about the application, and then actually start and run the application. So it seems like a kind of a long flow, but it does get you there. But one thing notice from the flow of the slide, notice that after the application is running, we eliminated the browser because we don't need it anymore. So the browser can go away. It won't close automatically in this scenario, but you don't need it, and the user can manually close it if desired. Okay. So let's take this a little bit further. We talked about this new custom protocol called JNLP or JNLPS. The use of this protocol will not support single sign-on, at least at the moment. But it does offer some other advantages that we'll talk about in just a second here. So here's how it's going to work. Typically, you're only going to want to do this from a browser. It will make no sense to do this from a command line, and you'll understand why in just a second. So in the address bar of the browser, you'll enter JNLP and then the rest of the URL. You could also do this from a hyperlink in a web page. That request, remember before we went to the form server, that request will directly be passed to the Java WebStart launcher. So before we even ask the server for anything, the browser is going to pass the entire request over to the launcher on the user's machine. It will then be the responsibility of the Java WebStart engine to go to the server, get all the information it needs to run the application, and then immediately run it. So a much faster flow and shorter flow to the end result of running the application. So my expectation is that this likely will result in a faster startup. Now, certainly there's no guarantee of that, but just following the flow, you should be able to anticipate that this will flow much faster. Again, this is not intended for the command line. You could, in theory, use it on the command line, but there won't be anything gained using it on the command line. This is really of value only when using it in the browser. Also notice, just as an interesting point, the version number on that installed successfully form. What's to come? So let's talk about running from a command line. As I mentioned before, you can do this from a command line, assuming the Java WebStart engine is in the system's path. If not, you'll need to fix that. And you're going to plug in the same URL that you typically would have put into the browser, and off you go, the application will run. Immediately, Java WebStart will spawn up. He'll go out to the form server, get the information he needs, and boom, the form will run again. So what you should notice by these three sets of slides, running with HTTP, running with JNLP, and then running from the command line, the last two options likely will result in the fastest startup of your application. Okay. One interesting feature of Java WebStart is that you have this concept of being able to install the app. And what that basically means is that the request that you made previously to run a particular Forms application with its configuration can be stored for later use so that the user potentially doesn't have to open a command line or open a browser. He could end up with a shortcut right on their desktop and then launch the same application later. But again, as I mentioned before, because there's no browser in this scenario, you won't be able to use single sign-on configured environments. This will only be for cases where single sign-on is not used. So in order to get this application to install, you'll open up the Java control panel, click on the View button off the General tab, and in the cache viewer, you'll see a list of applications that have been run. In my case, there's only one there, and I did that so that it was easier for viewing. In your case, there may be others, but you're going to want to look for the one of interest. In our case, it's going to be the one that says Oracle Form Services. You'll see a little upward-facing arrow button in that cache viewer. If you click on it, it will install a shortcut onto the desktop. That shortcut is directly tied back to the Java cache. You obviously can change the name of this once it's there. You could say My Sales Application or whatever you want to change it to. That's entirely up to you. There's even a way to configure the JNLP that I mentioned earlier so that that title ends up here as well. So you could customize that as needed. Now, whenever the user needs to run the application, no longer will they need to open up a browser, go to a web page, click on a link, wait for it to start. Now they'll just click on the shortcut that's on their desktop, and off they go, their application will run, exactly as it did previously. But again, that's a feature of Java. It's not related to forms, so there's lots of ways you could customize this if you refer to the Java documentation associated with Java WebStart. Okay. And as I mentioned, there's loads and loads of information about JNLP. Again, I don't know how many of you are developers or administrators or managers in between there, but at any rate, there's plenty of documentation there if there's questions about it. Out of the box, we set everything up for you for the most part, so there's really no reason to become an expert with JNLP, but it is kind of nice to be familiar with what's going on under the hood in some cases. So if you are interested, certainly take a look at some of that information that's out there. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is notifications. Again, this is a new feature in version 12. I was asked a lot about this once we delivered it. We had a lot of people wondering what in the world would I use that for. So I thought we'd kind of cover some of that information. So what the notifications feature does is causes a system notification event to fire in a receiving form. So imagine like a trigger firing in a form. Something happens when the administrator does something on the server. Again, it's, in this particular case, the system notification is caught or trapped in a when event raise trigger that you create. And the administrator will have the ability to cause one of 5 leveled notifications to be raised. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. Again, this is the administrator we're talking about. So the administrator doesn't necessarily need to know anything about forms. This is just about the administrator making a decision to send something to the running forms applications. And that something is decided by your organization at the time that the application is developed. These messages or notifications can be sent to one or more running runtime sessions, which means if you want to send something to just one user, you could do that. If you want to send a message out to all the running users, you could do that. Okay. There are some limitations to this particular feature. It should not be considered an emergency type of a notification tool. In other words, there is a possibility that the user will not receive your message immediately. It may take a few seconds or even a few minutes. In short, what happens is the message is picked up off of a queue on the server after an exchange is made from the client to the server. So for those of you familiar with Heartbeat, for example, when Heartbeat occurs, we go from the client to the server and we kind of remind the server that we're still here. And it's at that time that we ask the server, hey, do you have any information that I might need? And it's at that time that we'll pass that information back to the client to raise that event. So as I mentioned, they are effectively placed on a queue. And again, notifications should not be treated as critical events. Again, because of the fact that the message may not be received for a minute or so until Heartbeat occurs or until the user does something in the form, it may take just a little bit of time before the user gets that message. Okay. So again, I mentioned that I was questioned about, well, what are the possible use cases for this type of a feature? Well, off the top of my head, I just came up with a few, right? Alert users of pending outages or current system issues. So if, for example, you're getting reports of, I don't know, a performance issue in the environment, in the sales environment, you could potentially send a message to all the running users that says, hey, just to make you aware, we're having performance issues, please bear with us while we investigate the problem. You might want to force applications to exit cleanly when the user leaves for the day. Again, these are just examples I've made up off the top of my head. The way the notifications work, you do not necessarily need to display any kind of message. You could execute PL SQL in the application and, for example, exit, right? Exit form, commit form, or you could do whatever you want, open form. You could do just about anything you want that you could do in PL SQL, you could do through the system notification. This was a good one too. Allow administrators to enable or disable application features. So imagine a case where you introduce maybe a debugging feature into your own application, but on a day-to-day basis, you don't want it enabled. And then you have a user that potentially has a problem and you want to take advantage of this debugging feature. The user could send the appropriate notification that sends a message to that user's runtime session and turns that feature on, right? Set, maybe it's a button or something, set item property, enabled or whatever, and you enable that feature, where previously it was forced to be disabled. Right? You could also use the feature to send messaging out to logging as an example. For example, in version 12, we expanded or extended the message built in, where now you could send messages out to ODL logging without the user knowing it. So, for example, if you wanted to record maybe when the user logged on or when the user inserted a record or whatever the case is at a particular time, the administrator could send the message to the running session to say, okay, take a snapshot of that right now. What are they doing? Where are they? What's going on? Okay. So lots of information you could collect with that. So here's how the process looks to use this. To access the notifications, you'll go into Fusion Middleware Control, go into the Forms instance, and on the drop-down that you'll find at the top under that instance, you'll go onto the User Session page. On the User Sessions page, you'll see a list of the running Forms sessions. In my case, the end user machine was all the same for the sake of taking the screenshot. You'll choose the sessions that you want to interact with. So in this particular case, I've shown how you could select just the first row, or potentially maybe you want to select the first and the second row. Then what you'll do is you'll click on this new Notify button. You'll get a dialog box that looks like this with a drop down in it that has notification values 1 through 5. And you'll choose whichever one you want, 1 through 5. You'll click on OK, and the message will be sent out to the end user's application. Okay. On the application side, what you'll do is you'll create a new event in your form. And again, I mentioned you have to have a when event raised trigger. You'll set that event type to system notification, as you see here. And the code is entirely up to you. As I mentioned, you could do whatever you want with it. What will happen is the form's going to receive 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you decide what you want to do with that 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And again, these were just random ideas off the top of my head. You could do just about anything you want. So if you look in the case statement here, even if you're not a developer, it should be fairly clear what's going on. On line 11, or 12 actually, you could see when the notification value is 1, meaning the administrator sent me notification 1, do this. Select this particular information from a table into a particular text field on the form where the notification level is 1. And then the same would happen if it was notification 2, 3, 4, or 5. And again, you could decide what you want that behavior to be. The very last one there, you could see is the example I mentioned where you might want to exit the form, right? If it's 2 a.m. and you just want to shut down users that aren't at work anyway, this is a good way to do that. Send message level 5 to all the running users. The form does an exit form, no validate, and off you go. Now, alternatively, you could do a commit form and commit all their changes. That's entirely up to you. But again, that's the key, is that it's entirely up to you, the application developer, to decide how you want to leverage the power of this functionality. Okay. So it looks something like that. Okay. So now what I want to do is talk about images. Certainly using images is not anything new in Forms. It's been around for quite a while. But I kind of wanted to just revisit it just a little bit because I know today with all of everyone's websites becoming kind of flat and, as I like to call it, one-dimensional, I've had a lot of customers ask me, hey, is there any way to make a Forms application look like that? And the answer is yes. You certainly could do that. Of course, you have to have your own images, but there's certainly ways to do that. Okay. So one of the new features we added in 12 is the ability to add images to tab canvases. To me, this was pretty important from a visual point of view because the images you add to a tab canvas can not only be just to make your application look cooler or prettier or more aesthetically pleasing, they could also be functional icons or images. For example, let's say hypothetically you wanted a case where if something bad went wrong on tab 3, you could potentially have a red blinking dot on one of the tabs. So if the user happens to be on tab 1, but a query returns on tab 3 or some validated information on tab 3 is bad, you could visually show the user that something is wrong on tab 3, indicating to them that they have to go to tab 3 and make a correction before they can continue. In this particular example that I have on the slide, obviously the imagery here is just to make things look kind of cool. To me, this looks much better than the top image. It definitely has a much more modern approach to it. Okay. Several ways in which you could set those images in your application. When we first released version 12, so the current releases of version 12, basically the only way to set these is programmatically. So you'll do a set tab page property, refer to the tab page that you want changed, tell it. I seem to be having a bit of a technical problem here. Bear with me just. Yep. How about now?
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Okay. You could also set the tab page property icon name to a URL. In the first example, it's assumed that the image file came from a jar. In the second example, the image could come from a stored location on a server. Although I don't recommend using the URL approach, it can be done. The user may see a security warning when you go to load that image, but that's dependent upon the configuration and the Java versions you're using and a variety of other reasons or other conditions, but that'll be something you'd have to test, but it is technically possible. For 12.2.1.3, we are planning on adding the declarative functionality, meaning you'll be able to do this from the builder. Again, that's planned for 12.2.1.3. I don't know if we'll actually deliver on that or not, but here you can see is actually a nightly build where we are doing the initial testing of it. And it does seem to work pretty well, so we probably will be able to do this, I hope. Okay. Another option is for images and buttons, right? Hopefully you're all familiar with the idea that you could do this. But what's really interesting is when you use buttons in images, or images in buttons, excuse me, the images in the buttons potentially can be animated. So they don't have to be flat buttons. Let's see if I could do this. So I'm not sure if you could see that or not, but I have all three of those buttons set up with animated images. Can you see that, Doran? Hopefully you could see that. So you could get pretty creative here. Again, these are just fun images that I put in here. The images that you decide to use certainly can be much more creative than this and much more functional than this. But the idea is you don't always have to have an old school looking application where exit is just the word exit in the button. You could get as creative as you want. Okay. To set the button or the image in the button, again, by default, we're going to assume the image is coming out of the code base or a jar file, as the case may be. Similar to the tabs, you can also use a URL. That's kind of helpful as well in some cases. Another way that you could use images, and this is actually something I think a lot of people don't consider, is in an image item. And when I say use an image in an image item, I'm not necessarily referring to data in your database that represents maybe an image for some cataloged item. This type of functionality can be used easily to present the company logo, maybe just some decorative background information, or anything else that you want to present as an image. I remember earlier I said, you know, we're getting requests for doing that flat look and feel that HTML pages are now displayed as, especially all the Oracle websites. You certainly can use this image in that manner. You could create your flat buttons just like this. On this image item, create a when mouse click trigger and do whatever it is you want to do. In version 12, we also give you the ability to set the cursor style, meaning when the mouse runs over this item, you could change it from that pointing arrow to potentially the finger that you usually see when you move a mouse over a hyperlink. That could indicate to a user that, hey, this is something that has functionality under it because it's not an arrow anymore, it's a pointing finger. I guess I could click on this and it becomes obvious that it's a clickable button. So there's lots of things that you could do with images. In this particular case, the image item is a little bit different than all the other ways in which we deal with imagery. You have to use the read image file function, or built-in. In this particular example, it's going to read that image from the server, not the client. So it's going to go out onto the, in this case, the C drive on the server, assuming it's Windows, look for food.gif, and drop it into that image item. In the actual screenshot that I have above, you can actually see that the image is loaded from a URL. Okay. If you want to pick up the image from the client side, you could enable your form with WebUtil, and using the client image read image file built-in or procedure, you could pick up the image from the client machine. And as I mentioned earlier, in version 12, or actually version 11, we introduced the ability to fill an image item through a URL. Notice the argument in the middle there, URL. So basically you tell it what the URL is, tell it that it's coming from a URL and where you want to populate it. And notice here I don't actually have a URL. By not including the URL, it assumes that you're asking it to go to Codebase, which is the server/form/java or a jar file. Okay. Right, and here's a full example with a URL if you wanted to use one. Okay. So lots of ways that you could use those individual or singular images in that manner. And then, of course, there's the original intent of the image items where, for example, in a single or multi-row block, you have images that represent data in your database. Okay, this one hopefully everyone's familiar with. The concept is basically the same. To load the image, again, you're going to do read image file, which is going to read off the server. Or if you want it to come from the client, you would have to use the client image read image file. One of the limitations currently with the access through a URL, and that's the URL argument, is that those images currently cannot be stored in the database. So although you could load them into the image object, that image itself will not be saved. The only way that you could save them is if you read them off the file system, as in the code example I have there. Okay. So some tips for using images in your application. Some of these hopefully are pretty obvious. Whenever possible, store your images in signed jar files. This assumes that the images you're using are not part of the data sets. We're talking about just visual images that are to make, for the user's benefit, not necessarily the data. You want to sign your jar files with trusted and known certificates that come from certificate authorities like VeriSign Thought and a variety of other ones that are out there. This is somewhat of a requirement from the Java side now in order to improve security in the Java stack. You want to try to avoid packaging extra files in the jar in order to keep it as small as possible. That way it downloads as quickly as possible. I always recommend that the jar files be named with something unique. We have a lot of customers that tend to name their image files icons.jar or images.jar. Although that seems very straightforward to do that. It's not a good practice because what happens if you have a sales application and an HR application and an inventory application, you potentially are going to mix up, the files. So it's helpful to add the application name into the name of the file. You want to make sure that the image file size is as small as possible. In other words, it makes no sense to put an extremely high resolution image into a jar file and then squeeze it down into a button that's 20 pixels by 20 pixels. Similar is true of the actual size of the image, not necessarily the file, but the visual size of the image. Again, it makes no sense to have an image that's the size of your entire display when you're only going to put that image inside of a button that's the size of your thumbnail. Okay. And again, to what I was saying earlier, consider how the image is going to be used. If it's going into a small container, there's very little reason to send a high resolution image in the jar file or in any other manner for that example. Because all that's doing is wasting resources, and we want to try to keep that to a minimum. Okay. So let's take a quick look at some power tips. Some of these are version 12 specific, some are not. There are many more than what's here. I just randomly grabbed a set just because I thought they were kind of cool. So here are some cool applet parameters that you might find interesting. So how often do your users tend to adjust or resize the parent application window? One of the things you'll find when you do that is there's a trigger in Forms when window resize that fires with each pixel change of the parent window. The problem with that is as you're trying to resize the window, at the same time, we're trying to send messages to the server, and what you end up with is a very jittery type of a behavior, almost a performance. It gives the appearance of a performance problem. Assuming your application doesn't use that when window resize trigger, you can set the applet parameter dynamic layout equals false, and the result is the window will immediately resize without any stuttering or hesitation. So that kind of gives the application a nice feel. I mentioned earlier this idea of having or wanting to prevent the user from resizing the window, kind of a opposite of the first one we talked about. You could do that with is resizable equals false. This one goes back to version 10. So if you're using version 10, 11, or 12, this is also helpful for people that are visually impaired. You do have control of the cursor blink rate. So how fast is the cursor blinking when it's in a text field? You could set the value to 0 and stop it from blinking altogether and just have it on all the time. Some users like that. Because these are applet parameters, you can allow the user themselves to set these. So in other words, they could set these on the URL or the request for the form. So that's kind of nice. And for cases where you don't like the Oracle branding, I'm going to feel a little sad by it, but if you don't like the Oracle branding, the logo or the background or the splash screen that all say Oracle or Oracle Forms on it, you certainly could swap those out with your own. The logo refers to the logo in the menu bar that's shown by default, the Oracle logo on the right-hand side. Background refers to the area in the browser. Actually, it shows up when you run it anywhere, but the area that sits below your own canvas and window. And the splash screen is that startup image that shows up while the application is loading, and it by default says Oracle Form Services and the version number and all that. You could certainly replace those. Okay. So those are applet parameters. Let's take a quick look at some environment variables. So this is a new feature added in version 12. We had a lot of requests for offering a way in which to handle how text is or isn't selected in a text field. In earlier versions, it used to be the case where when the user used their mouse to navigate to a text field, all the text that was in the field was not selected. The cursor just dropped exactly where you clicked. Then in the newer versions, I believe in version 10, we changed it. And what you found was when you clicked in a text field, all the text was selected, which is the opposite of what you had before. And then in some variation or patch version of 10, we changed it again. And then in version 11, we went back and forth again. And in version 12, I kind of defended our customers and said, it makes no sense for us to keep changing this. Why don't we offer our customers the ability to make the choice on their own? So now we've done that. So now with the environment variable form select on click, you as the administrator can decide how you want your application to behave. Do you want all the text selected when you enter into the field or not? Again, that's new in version 12. In version 12, we also added a new environment variable that allows you to set the change password hint. What that's referring to is, in the case where the database username and password expires and you have to change it, you now have the ability to provide some information along with the dialog box. And the example I always like to give is, let's say your organization now has a different set of rules of what passwords must look like. You could provide that information. For example, you might want to say passwords must include upper and lowercase letters and at least one number, or whatever it is you want. You can include up to 255 characters. So I don't have an example here, but you'll see that 255 characters is quite a lot. Given that Twitter only allows 160 characters, I believe it is, 255 is quite a long ways off, and you should be able to provide plenty of information. The same ability or same function can be used for the standard login dialog box. The environment variable is a little bit different, but the concept is basically the same, and more information about that is in the Forms deployment guide. Okay. This one was raised at the request of at least a few customers that were using single sign-on. What they were saying was that if for some reason their single sign-on protected forms application failed to log in correctly, the database username and password dialog box would be displayed. Well, because the database username and password field is generally expected to be hidden from the user, right? Their access should only be through a single sign-on user account. We wanted to provide a way in which we could prevent that database login dialog from being presented. So we added this new feature. The idea being that if the single sign-on login fails, the administrator will contact, or the user will contact the administrator and explain that, hey, I'm trying to log in with single sign-on and it's failing for some reason. The administrator would find out, well, that's because the password expired, the database password expired, and they could go in and update it and make the correction. So certainly, high on the list of discussions in the IT world these days is cloud. We have a lot of customers asking about using forms in cloud. At the moment, infrastructure as a service or compute is the only option that we have, at least from a supported point of view. It's pretty straightforward. You would take responsibility for the installation of your environment in our cloud space. You could choose to install the database along with it. However, you don't have to. Alternatively, you could use the database cloud service and have your middle tier installation talk to it. It's entirely up to you, and solely based on your level of load and demand. So there's definitely some options available for you with cloud. We are looking at some other variations that might be of interest to some of you. At this stage of the game, I don't have much to share on that, other than to say that we are investigating some potentially more desirable architectures that might be of value to you. So hopefully, as we get more information on that, we'll make that available. Okay. So what are we doing going forward? Well, we're always working on something. There's always changes coming. We have a lot of enhancements, as I mentioned, for cloud. We're going to continue to work on some UI enhancements. We're going to make the administrative tools a little better, a little smarter. We're always trying to look for ways to improve performance. The client configurations that we just delivered, Java WebStart, Forms Standalone Launcher, we're going to try to make those better than they already are, and lots more ways to integrate with other Oracle products. In version 12, we added BI Publisher integration. Hopefully, as we go forward, we'll deliver some more. If you look at the imagery on the right, you'll see some of the stuff that we're planning to do going forward. We're planning on adding an advanced configuration page, which will hopefully allow you to edit the Forms template files, as well as a variety of others that are currently not managed by Fusion Middleware Control. We're going to give you a way in which you can do that. In the middle there, you could see some canvases with some gradient coloring. Again, hopefully to give you a little bit more of an option on how your application looks. And on the bottom right, you could see what we're potentially going to call row striping or banding, where in a multi-record block, every so many rows is of a different color. In this example, it's every other row, but the hope is that you'll be able to change it to just about any frequency that you're interested in. Okay. So there's lots going on. For the latest and greatest information, again, I encourage you to go out to the Forms Oracle Technology Network page. We try to keep it as up to date as possible, but if you want Forms 12 specific information, if you go out to the Documents tab of the OTN Forms page, you'll see down on the bottom Technical Papers, and that'll take you to this page that has some form specific stuff. On that page, you'll see a link for new features. That's a PDF or a white paper that provides a little bit more detail on many of the new features in 12. It is not an all-inclusive document, so there are some features that are not included there, but it does include the majority of them. The next one down below that is the client deployment options. That one covers the Java WebStart, Form Standalone Launcher, and some of the other information you'll potentially want to know. And again, there's loads of other information specific to version 12 here. Okay. Community information. I say community information, but as I mentioned, there's always information available on the Forms page of Oracle Technology Network. There is the OTN Forms Forum that's pretty active these days. I do monitor that very closely, so if you have questions you'd like to share with the community, please do. If you have comments, same thing, suggestions for new features, please do. It's always nice to share the information with our peers and other folks that are familiar with the product rather than just one-on-one. That way everyone can benefit from the answers. Of course, there's always support. For those of you that have active support accounts, I encourage you to take advantage of those guys. They're hard at work all day, every day around the world. And then if you're interested in following me directly on Twitter, just to get the latest and greatest in real time, please do on Twitter. What I have now, I talked about with Doran, are some of the questions that were sent in before the session. I think what we'll do is we'll go through those. I'll go through these kind of quickly. Hopefully, if I haven't already answered your question, I'll answer your question here. If I still don't answer your question, once I hand it back over to Doran, maybe we can spend just a couple minutes and we'll address those. Some of these I think will be of interest to a lot of people. So someone asked, how do we achieve the independence to IE or Internet Explorer from Microsoft? I assume what that's referring to is this, the fact that Internet Explorer basically is the only browser supporting Java plugins these days. And as I mentioned earlier, in Forms 12, we introduced the browser list options. That's really going to be your only way to get away from Internet Explorer as far as I know. The next question says, can I scale the forms according to the screen resolution? Well, you have the ability to do just about anything you want in a Forms application programmatically, but I'm going to guess and say this is more of a question asking, can you make Forms act like an HTML page, where when you make the HTML page bigger, for example, a text field automatically gets bigger? And the answer is no, we don't do that natively, but again, you can do that programmatically. Right? As I mentioned, you have the ability to monitor when window resized. You're certainly able to detect that as an application developer and monitor whether or not the user is making the window bigger or smaller, and if they are, programmatically scale the text fields however you want to scale them. So you certainly can do that programmatically. Someone asked, how do I migrate from 11 to 12c WebStart? That's kind of an interesting question. So there really is no migration per se. As I mentioned, Java WebStart has no effect on your application directly. So basically, it's just telling the configuration that you want to use WebStart, and that's it. From an application point of view, generally speaking, nothing should have to change. There's no special requirement by the end user. You just, as an administrator, make the change on the server and say, we want to use WebStart, and you're done. There's a question here about the new database or newer database feature, RAS. From a Forms point of view, this really has nothing to do with Forms, right? And this is about security at the database level. We don't do anything specific with regard to that. Forms basically is a client to the database. So, whatever you do on the data server is entirely up to you. We're just going to act as a client. One thing to bear in mind, however, is that each Forms version is based or built on top of a database version. So in the case of Forms 12.2.10 all the way through 12.2.12, the The database version we're built on is 11.203. So if you try to do something new in version 12 of the database that version 11 doesn't understand, then there could potentially be a problem on the form side. In the .3 release of forms, we are planning to pick up 12.102 of the database client layer, so that should help in some of those cases. I was asked about modern GUI and integration possibilities, and I didn't really know how to answer this in a way in which could make a whole lot of sense without spending a whole lot of time on it. But basically, the Forms UI is completely extensible through Java. So if you're not happy with the way Forms looks at runtime, you have nearly complete control over how it looks. If you don't like the way our buttons look, if you don't like the way our text fields look, or any other object that we deliver, you have the ability to change them using pluggable Java components. If you don't see a component that we offer that you want, you could create your own through a Java bean. So you have the ability to make your Forms application do nearly anything you want. And to me, that actually makes the Forms UI far better than any other technology similar to it, and even a web page. Because with a web page, it is what it is, and you're kind of stuck with it to some degree. I understand you can, build your own objects, but you have a lot more power with Java than you do HTML. So there's a lot you could do. How long will Oracle Forms be supported? Well, that's kind of a vague, open-ended question. So Forms 12 will be supported through October 2020 with Premier support. Extended support for Forms 12 goes out to October 2023. I assume what the real question is how long will Forms be around for? And the answer to that question is, I don't know any more about how long Forms is going to be around for than I could tell you the database will be around for. It's an active product. We literally have thousands of users around the world using it. Oracle will continue to produce it as long as they feel that it is an active participant in the industry, and we'll go forward with it. At the moment, there are plans to continue. As I mentioned, we're working on the next release right now. How far we go out is unknown. There's unfortunately just no answer. We do not have a planned end of life, let's put it that way. But executives could change their mind at any time. Is there a way to run Forms without the repository database? And the answer to that question basically is no. The repository database is not necessarily a requirement of Forms. It is a requirement of the WebLogic server infrastructure. So because WebLogic server infrastructure is required by Forms, indirectly you become required to have a repository. However, as I say that, because of the way the licensing works, for the most part, with some exceptions, there should not be any problems with you having a repository from a licensing point of view. There are some exceptions to that. Since Forms requires a database anyway, there's no reason that your repository can't live in your user database. That way you only have a single database, and consequently, are not in violation of any licensing issues. In cases where you have Internet Application Server Enterprise Edition or WebLogic Server Suite, you're entitled to a database instance for the repository. And I believe the same is true for Developer Suite as well. The only case where that isn't the case is the Forms and Reports license. Someone asked about Debian Linux. That is not a certified platform, so I personally don't have any experience with it. I do not believe there are any plans to certify it. So that's a platform that, although it may work, it's one that we do not test or support. And with that, I'm brought to the end, and I will be happy to pass it back to Doran and the PITS team. And before I do that, though, I would like to thank PITS for inviting me to do this. It's always nice to get the word out of what's going on. As I mentioned, here we just touched on some of the features that are out there, but there's dozens and dozens more, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that new features document for a better idea of what's going on. That document will be updated once we roll out the new version, so stay tuned for what's to come. Doran, thanks, and I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. It was a pleasure to hear you. So we just tried to figure out how to get back the... Great. We did it already. So I guess my colleague Ronald will continue now. Thank you so much, Michael. We hear us in a couple of minutes again.
Thank you.
So, yes, Michael, thank you very much. That was a lot of information, but very interesting. Thank you for that. So, hi together. My name is Ronald, and I would like to talk just real quick about the new features and how PitsCon may help you to use them more efficient. One nice feature is the possibility to create the custom color schemes for your entire application, as you see here in different examples. These color schemes can be defined in the registry.dat file. The idea is to extract the color settings out of the code and the programming environment. But every change in the form, for example, with the visual attributes, overrides the registry.dat. To use the registry.dat properly, you have to set the visual attributes for items that are to the value default. And that might look like that. You have an item with a visual attribute, and that would override the value of the registry.dat. So we have to change, for example, this value here for the entire application. In PitsCon, we have a hidden trick to do that. If we set a new value with 4 stars, as you see here in the screen, it will be set after updating to the value default, as you can see here. So if you do that everywhere we'd like to do, we can use the registry.dat over the complete application, and we don't have the color settings in the forms anymore. We have it global in one file. I will do that pretty quick because we are a little bit lack of time now. So one more enhancement I want to talk about is the Oracle diagnostic logging. As heard before, in 12c it is possible to programmatically send entries to the ODL with the message built in. So that's new in this version. So if you have messages in your application, for example, like here, which you want to send to the ODL, you have to add a new parameter to the built-in. So for that, in PitsCon, we can add that needed parameter almost automatic. We simply replace the old message with the new one and the additional parameter. And afterwards, we have the new message built in with the ODL notification, which will be sent to the Fusion middleware control and can view there in the log files. At the end, and before giving back to Doreen, just a few words about upgrading your Forms application. Most issues coming up when you upgrade from Forms 10 or 11G are located in the environment installation, the new environment, in the 12c environment. The code in Forms is not getting touched at all, and the upgrade is pretty quick and most of the time pretty easy. But even if you are coming from version 6 or older, we have a lot of replace templates which we can generate a testable application within 3 days. If you need more information here, please don't hesitate to contact us. Yeah, really quick, but now back to Doreen. Thank you.
Okay, I just try to get this stuff here handled. Just a second, please. Where do I find? I'm lost with my mouse. Okay, but yeah, here it is. So this one. Wow. Okay. So hopefully you all see the fastest way to Oracle Forms 12c is with Pits. Can you see my slides, Ronald? Okay, great. So thank you for this very fast part from my colleague, which means it's a nice handover with fast track to Forms 12c, which is especially for Forms versions less than 9e. Which means it's a professional service which helps you to upgrade your application to Oracle Forms 12c faster than you can ever imagine. It's an automatic upgrade with PitsCon. It included a PitsCon license and upgrade templates, and everything is on an Oracle virtual machine. There is included a 3-day workshop on site and, of course, an estimation about further migration effort, which means you've got predefined migration steps, predefined templates out of our experience, which means at the end you've got a totally secure upgrade of your Oracle Forms version to the latest one, which is 12c. This upgrade starts with a price of 12,500 euros, and if you would like to get support from our side or Oracle, just contact us, and we will be happy to support you with this offer. If you are on a Forms version greater than 9, just contact us under customer service at pits.de. And just to stay in contact with us and to follow up for our new events, you can have a short look on our website, which is pits.de, or follow us via Twitter at pits_GmbH, or use our contact formula. And if you would love to hear more from Michael, then you can stay tuned and save the date. So I guess in June, Michael, we will meet again for our next webinar, which is more about BR Publisher and Oracle reports.
I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sure. I'm open for any suggestions you have. We can. We'll certainly be together again before the year's over. We'll hopefully have more opportunities to do webinars. We'll be at DOAG. So there's lots of time for us to continue sharing some good information.
Yes, great. So what we want you to know, there's been a couple of questions during this webinar via the chat functionality or the F&A. We will answer all your questions after this webinar via email, and of course we will stay in contact with Michael, and you can follow him on Twitter and us also. So thank you so much. I would say we can round it up. So if there are no further questions, thank you so much for taking care or taking part of this webinar. Michael, it was amazing. So many new features. How could you hide all this before?
Well, there's plenty out there. I hope that everyone will take an opportunity to at least review some of the information about the new features. And we're always open for feedback because, I mean, it's our customers' ideas that are used when we deliver these. So a lot of the features that we did deliver, believe it or not, came from our customers. So we encourage you to continue sharing that information, whether it's on the forum or Twitter or email or even just discussions we have when we meet you at the conferences. So thank you so much for that information. It's very helpful.
Yes, exactly. So please feel free to contact us on every possible social media platform or via mail or whatever. And whenever we get a question, we would love to forward to Michael and he will answer. And take a look on our knowledge base and our Twitter and other accounts. So far, if you would like to experience Oracle Forms 12c, feel free to contact us. And up to myself, thank you so much to my colleagues for presenting such a great amount of information all about Forms 12c. And yes, we would love to hear and see you the next time. And thank you for participating. Have a nice day, a nice week. See you next month.